probably put that. Well, welcome. This is the first week of Mere Christianity. So this will be a 10-week study that we're going to be going through. I've got it live on TikTok on my phone. I need to, I guess, have more people to have it tie into the same studio. So kind of still learning how all this stuff works to go live on Facebook, TikTok, and YouTube. So I've got Facebook and YouTube kind of over here, and I got TikTok over here. So I might be bouncing back and forth between a couple different cameras here. But this is the start of a 10-week deep dive through Mere Christianity. If you go to my website at BibleNerd.com, and nerd's spelled with a 3 instead of an E, there's some fun things with the number 3 there that I think is really fun. And it was available, and it just was available on a bunch of different platforms. So I thought it was kind of fun. And so a lot of my logos, I have like the 3 backwards to look like a 3. I just think it's kind of cool. It's not the easiest thing to optimize because Bible Nerd's probably more common, but it was available. I thought it was fun. And the 3, I think, has some fun little Easter eggs built right into it. So we'll let a few people log in. I've been posting in a couple of different places, so I'll give it a few minutes before we get started here. But if you're in the comments and you're watching, maybe just type hello, where you're from, maybe what state, something like that, and maybe which platform you're on, just so I can kind of test my systems here a little bit to see who's able to use kind of which platform. So again, I'm really new to some of this stuff, so I'm just learning by fire in a lot of ways. So we'll let a few people kind of get ready to get logged in here a little bit. So we'll just hold off on getting started. If you do go to BibleNerd.com, again with a 3 for the E in nerd, just like my username, just like my tag, BibleNerd.com, up at the top, we'll have a PDF that you can download, a little link that you can download for what we'll be talking about today, week 1. It has some study questions, things like that. And then after tonight, I'll replace that with week 2. So you'll be able to download and maybe just review it this week and be ready next week to answer questions or just jump on and get involved with this particular study. So hopefully it'll be kind of fun. It'll be a fun little 10 weeks. And to give you a little background, I had prepared this kind of from scratch, just with how much I love the work of C.S. Lewis and this particular book. My church was asking if I could just kind of take over a men's Bible study group. And most of the time we do actual studies of the Bible itself, which is great. Every time I get done with a study, I would just do like a little theme for 1 or 2 weeks, just to kind of break things up. So we did like Reformation history. We did just tips about how to study the Bible. We did some hermeneutics where we just broke down some words that were very common, just kind of break up the study a little bit in between different studies. And I had an opportunity to kind of vote and say, hey, could we do maybe a study on Mere Christianity? It'd probably have to take more than just a couple weeks. It ended up being a 10-week thing that was great, and everybody really enjoyed it. So to give you an idea, here's the whole thing. So here's what I created for this. Show it on a couple different cameras here. All this. So this is what I'm going to be going through over the next 10 weeks. I figured I already created the content. Why not just put it out there? Plus, with the group I was able to do this with, I found little errors here and there or spelling errors, in what I printed out, or just some questions that didn't really resonate. So I kind of went back and reworked them a little bit. So it kind of gave me a chance to kind of beta test it live. And now here I am kind of beta testing it here really live. So we'll see how this goes. But any chance I get to talk about C.S. Lewis or Mere Christianity or anything Bible based, I'm really going to jump all over it kind of thing. Hence the name Bible Nerd. So we'll give it just a few extra minutes here to let everybody get started. If you can, just comment kind of where you're from, which platform you're using. So again, so I can just kind of make sure that these are all working. I've got Facebook and YouTube on this camera and then TikTok over here. I try to put them together on StreamYard, but I think I have to have more followers or subscribers on TikTok to allow like the studio. So that's what we're going to be working on, is just getting them combined. So might be a little choppy, but I'm new to this, so I'm still just learning by fire in a lot of ways. So we'll see how this goes. So we'll give it maybe 1 more minute or so to get started. And for those of you who just jumped on, if you go to BibleNerd.com, up on the top, you can download the free PDF. There's no sign in or anything. It's totally free. It's just a PDF of what we're going to go through this week. And then that'll change out to what we're going to talk about next week. So you have kind of between now and next Tuesday to read the chapters in the study guide, answer the questions, and be ready for next week as well. But this week will be really a lot of fun as we get started here. So let's give it just another few seconds here. Just make sure everything's working. Nothing's on fire. So again, I got TikTok over here, Facebook, and YouTube over here. So my eyes might be going kind of back and forth as we're figuring this out. All right. Let me get my notes up here. Okay. And again, thanks for tuning in. Thanks for liking, sharing, subscribing. Hopefully this content will resonate with you. I'll be doing it every Tuesday night at 7 p.m. Mountain Standard Time for the next 10 weeks. So this is week 1 of the study. And I'll probably chop it up to little shorts and send it out through the week and see if it just grows or what happens with it. But either way, let's get started with it. So I want to start by introducing the man himself, C.S. Lewis, Clive Staples Lewis, and he almost deserved it. So he always had a kind of funny issue with his name, but I always thought that was kind of funny. But I want to give you the context of where Mere Christianity arose, and my aim is to give you a little background that helps you read the book a little bit more clearly, to get to know Lewis maybe just a little bit more, and how this book even came about, and what to watch for as we continue to read through it. So C.S. Lewis was born in Belfast in 1898 and grew up in Ireland and England. He was raised in a household that belonged to a Protestant church called the Church of Ireland, but not very deeply devout. And his mother ended up dying when he was very young, and he just drifted away from Christianity in his adolescence and even became an atheist. Now, he was a gifted student. He even served in World War I briefly, and he studied at Oxford and eventually became a fellow and a tutor of English literature. And he became close friends with J.R.R. Tolkien and some others that formed this literary group known as the Inklings, Inklings. So Inklings. And they would toss back and forth their book ideas. They would toss back and forth their discussions. And the friendship, especially around Tolkien, became a big role in Lewis returning to his Christian faith. Now, he doesn't say in Surprised by Joy that the death of his mother or the war was really the reason why he left Christianity. It might have been a combination of those things as he was young, but he definitely became an atheist. In fact, one of his first writings that we have is even anti-theist in a lot of different ways. And the process wasn't a sudden conversion back to Christianity. It was a long, steady, intellectual, imaginative reorientation is what he calls it. In fact, he even calls himself the most reluctant convert. His autobiography, called Surprised by Joy, was eventually adopted to a film, and they picked up on that idea and actually titled the movie The Most Reluctant Convert. And it's really cool. The movie actually has another scholar that plays C.S. Lewis. They even have some on-location sites during the movie that's really pretty cool. It's well worth watching. I think Angel Studios might have it, but it's an older movie. Maybe it's still on YouTube or something like that. But it's a great little movie about C.S. Lewis. And what you'll see in the book here, the argument for a morality or a moral law and the existence of God that wrote that law became a big determiner that got him back to a theistic worldview, but not Christianity. So that's what the book will even frame. We'll even see as we get through the book that he mentions that we're not within 100 miles of the God of Christianity yet. He just wants to lay down the foundation for a theistic argument. And most of that's tied up into this idea of a moral law that is outside of ourselves and our cultures and timeless, certain moral laws that we all have a sense for. And that was something that really he wrestled with and had great debates with and was trying to kind of wrestle with this idea. And that's what we're going to see in the first part of this book, which I think is really important to lay that foundation of how this book actually works. If you're just joining us, maybe put in the comments the number 1 if you haven't read the book before, maybe 2 if you have. This is the book Mere Christianity by C.S. Lewis. I think it'd just be fun to see how many people are on here that are interested or have never read this book before. And most of the people I talk to, they've read it maybe years ago and haven't revisited it or have never even heard of it. So I thought it'd be kind of fun to see in the comments which one of these is kind of what group you guys fall into. So he also was a very prolific writer. He wrote over 30 works of a bunch of different literary styles, where mere Christianity, along with the problems of pain, miracles, would fall into Christian apologetics. Lewis did a lot of other scholarly criticisms, especially of medieval and Renaissance literature. He also had a lot of imaginative fiction that he did. Of course, Narnia series is one that most people know if they know C.S. Lewis at all. That's by far his most famous work. But another work that's actually, I think, gaining some traction, which is really interesting, is a science fiction series that was called Space, and then was changed to Cosmic Trilogy. So that name is out there a couple different ways, but just shows how imaginative and how his stories and his mythical framing really helped him to develop theological truths in a very unique way. But he wasn't a professor of theology. And he only actually has one work that would even be like a commentary on the Psalms that's even close to that type of work. Most of C.S. Lewis was more of a fictional style on one side and different types of commentaries on the other side. And we have to look at also Lewis lived during 2 world wars, and he bore witness to human suffering and moral collapse in very unique ways. And his writings often become very practical, but also very urgent. You'll see that in kind of the letters that he writes. He wanted to offer hope and a Christian classical framework in modern languages. And that's what makes C.S. Lewis, I think, really unique as well. He knew many different languages: Latin, Greek, French, Italian, German. He was also proficient in Old English and even Old Norse, along with Welsh. So this guy had a really good idea of how language even works across these different ways of human communication. And just having that background of being able to tell stories in different genres and to be able to draw on the stories that resonate with one language or another really gave C.S. Lewis a very literal style of being able to do things in a very imaginative way. I don't know if that makes complete sense, but that's something unique that you may not get when you read C.S. Lewis's novels, or it's worth spending a little time on what C.S. Lewis was all about. So Mere Christianity itself began as a series of BBC radio addresses given between 1942 and 1944 during World War II. And Britain was facing uncertainty, loss, moral confusion, literal bombs going off all over the place, and the collapse of all these countries around them, and this machine kind of working its way across Europe. And the BBC asked speakers to address practical and unifying themes that would appeal to the general public during this time. And C.S. Lewis was asked to speak about Christianity because, got something happening here on TikTok. Hold on one second. I don't want to bump my phone too much. I have to have kind of my phone over here to do TikTok and my other stuff over here. So the BBC asked him to come and do these radio addresses. And because these were radio talks to a general audience, Lewis wanted to write plainly. He wanted to add some clarification, accessibility, and he didn't want to necessarily get bogged down in deep theological holes. He was really just trying to get an overall belief of what Christians believe, why it's a good reason to believe these things, and hence the name Mere Christianity. So is it systematic theology? By no means. It's not going to get into that. It's kind of like if you had a house and you've got kind of a hallway leading to all the doors. Mere Christianity is kind of the hallway. The doors that you're going into might be the different denominations, Catholic or Orthodox or Protestant or Baptist, and all the different denominations, maybe the other rooms, but the hallway is kind of the connecting themes of the house of Christianity. And in fact, if the book ever gets too deeply, often see that that's where Lewis will throw in a wonderful analogy. But he also warns analogies are just trying to help us better understand. It's not the thing itself. Just like I think why parables have such long standing ability to be kind of timeless in a way, but they're not necessarily the thing itself. There's still some interpretive work that has to be done. There's digging a little bit deeper. And he often says, if the analogy doesn't work, throw it away. It's not designed to be something that hinders. It's just trying to help us connect with it. Here's maybe a modern way of looking at that. Just the other day, I saw on TikTok, a guy had a basketball. And so, okay, if this is a nucleus of an atom, if this was the size of the atom's nucleus, how far away are the neutrons flying around it in relation to now the size being the size of this basketball? And he'd ask people on the street, and they'd kind of make circles around the basketball. And he said, no, they'd be 6 miles away. So if the thing was that big, the things flying around would be 6 miles away. So again, analogies are trying to help us shrink that down where we can understand it without necessarily being the thing itself. You can see that happen with the solar system. You'll have the solar system with all the planets just kind of lined up. But when you put them to scale, the distance just is unreal how far away the planets get from the sun or even each other. I saw something that said basically all the planets can fit at certain times of the year and certain rotations from the Earth to the moon. Like every planet can fit in that distance. And that's such a small distance in relation to the sun to the last planet. I mean, massive. And then we're only talking about our solar system. You expand that out to the universe, it's just insane. But again, that's where analogy tries to help us make those, shrink them down or make them understandable or see a different angle or add some poetry, add some imagination to try to make these things work. But it's not systematic theology. It's not going into the individual rooms of denominations, which I think that's what makes this work such a reachable work for anybody at any level of Christianity or atheist or whatever. It helps to better understand some of these key concepts. So I wanted to kind of break that down as we get started here and just kind of strip away denominational particulars and focus on more of the common ground, the mere Christianity, some of the beliefs and why there's good reason for these beliefs without having to get too stuck into dogma or again, systematic theology. Now, before we go any further, let's drop in the comments where you're from, which platform you're using, because again, I'm testing out a couple different platforms. I got Facebook and YouTube over here, and then I think I've got TikTok over here. So I'd love to make sure it's working and maybe drop a comment. Let me make sure I can see comments. Hopefully I can. Oh, maybe I can. So I'm using StreamYard for Facebook and YouTube, but I couldn't do that with TikTok just yet. So still working out all the details here. But if you want to drop a comment of where you're from, that'd be awesome. All right. So we mentioned that these are talks. These were radio addresses that were given, and now we have a book. So the book was adopted from these talks. So there is a little bit of difference on how to change it from a book versus like a discussion kind of thing. So you'll see little differences there in the way it was rewritten to kind of modify or adapt it for a book. In fact, you'll even see chapters that were added because C.S. Lewis would get letters or the BBC would get these letters, and he felt like, okay, I wanted to address what I said in that previous talk. Or maybe you got a bunch of letters that were kind of the similar theme and said, oh, this is worth maybe addressing a little further in book form that you don't have a chance to do while you're doing a live or a radio address. So it's kind of cool to get a behind the scenes a little bit of how people were reacting to these talks to then have C.S. Lewis comment or add to the book in a way to just maybe have more time to clarify some of those issues. So see a couple chapters that even kind of address that there was a common objection or a common theme to something that he said that he wanted to address. It'd be amazing to see what he would address now. I often think if Paul was around, what would he say, or which church would be getting the letter today if Paul was still around? So it's kind of a fun way to peel back the curtain on some of the responses he was getting from these particular radio addresses. So let's talk about the format of the book itself. There's some key features I think are worth noting that's a little different than a standard book. First, you'll see the tone. It's a little more conversational. It's a little occasionally witty. You'll see it's a little more back and forth because it was radio addresses. Second is the structure. The book is organized around large themes arranged over 4 parts, or what's called books. So you have the book itself, and then instead of being like a chapter or a section is what we'd call it today, they are called books. So they're really 4 parts that are broken into books. So that's when we'll mention we're going to be reading, book 2, chapter 1, or whatever we're going to be doing during the study. That's just kind of what's referenced in the book itself. Third is its method. Again, Lewis uses moral and philosophical and analogies rather than deep theological summaries alone. Now he'll get into some of that. But again, if he gets a little too deep into that, that's where you'll start seeing that he'll revert back to some storytelling, which I think is really cool. And he expects to persuade people who are doubtful or simply searching and not trying to win any complex doctrinal debates. That's really not what the purpose of this particular book is. So let's take a look at the closer design of the book a little bit before we start getting into the questions. And you can find the questions to these studies that I'm doing each week on BibleNerd.com. Right at the top, I put a little link that allows you to download a free PDF. There's no sign-in required. There's no capturing your information. None of that's totally free. It just allows you to grab this study guide for this week, and then I'll post the next one that's in the blogs already now. So down at the bottom, there should be a blog that has next week's study in it. So you can spend this week just going through the questions, and then you can interact with us, and we'll just have fun kind of going through this study together. But let's kind of look at the index of the book. If you have a book with you, go ahead and open it up, and we'll kind of walk through it a little bit. but you'll see some of the titles of the books and then the chapters within the book. So book 1 is Right and Wrong as a Clue to the Meaning of the Universe. Here Lewis makes his famous case for a universal moral law, what he'll call the law of human nature. So that's the term that he uses back in 1940, that is something that he just feels is kind of like a law that affects human nature, that is really tied to this idea of a moral law that is outside of ourselves, outside of our societies, outside of our ethnicities, all the categories we can do. He says there's some sort of moral law outside of all of that that is pressing upon us to do what we should do or shouldn't do. And it's outside of sometimes what we want to do, which makes the moral law something we don't have to follow, but we still feel it pressing on us. And we'll get into that as we start the study. But I think that's one of the way the book's set up is to kind of lay that foundation first before we even talk about the God of Christianity, is to lay down this theistic worldview, mostly tied to the idea of a moral law. And he's laying down kind of the foundation that there's an intelligence or a mind behind that law, and even creation itself, before we even get to a God of Christianity or any other religion for that matter. He simply wants to lay down a convincing argument that the moral law is beyond just mere social convention or evolution and just suggest there has to be some sort of moral lawgiver to the moral reality. So that's what we're going to be diving into in book 1. That is a few chapters as we get started. Book 2 is going to get into now what Christians believe. So now that we've laid the foundation for that, book 2 inside of Mere Christianity is going to talk about what Christians actually believe. And they'll actually have a couple things what they don't. So that section's helpful to kind of say, okay, what do they believe and what they don't believe? Looks like we're getting something on TikTok here. All right. And so that'll get into the nature of the moral law a little bit more, the nature of Christ, the problem of sin and pain, the doctrines behind defining Christian beliefs, and including the incarnation and the atonement. So that's really what that section, book 2, what Christians believe, is going to be that particular section. The next one's really interesting. Book 3 is Christian behavior. This is the longest section. The chapters are relatively short, so don't get too intimidated by how many chapters there are. The messages are pretty short, but this is by far the largest section and have some overlap as he goes through it. It's actually pretty amazing. I really love that section of the just Christian behavior and how, if you have this worldview of Christianity, how it should affect how you interact with your wife and your business partners and your kids, and all of the things the Christian worldview is supposed to kind of imbued into that belief system, and how we still fall short of those standards and those virtues, but at least shows you kind of what separates Christian behavior. And that's the largest section of the book is book 3. And then book 4 is called Beyond Personality, or the First Steps to the Doctrine of the Trinity. It's a great section. And again, as we go through each one of these, we'll kind of reference back and forth on how it works. But here is where C.S. Lewis probably does the deepest spiritual transformation of Christianity. And it's this idea of becoming a new man that's really prevalent in this section, and this inner work of the Spirit, and how prayer can work, and how we're united in Christ. And that's kind of what that section is going to talk about a lot. And then Lewis really dives into one of the better introductions to the doctrine of the Trinity. Again, is it systematic theology? No. I don't even know if it references too many scripture verses necessarily. Again, it's just kind of putting on the first steps of that doctrine that has defined Christianity for so many centuries. And so it definitely is worth kind of diving into that particular book. Now, as you read Mere Christianity, watch how Lewis moves from this shared human experience to the Christian claims. That's what we're going to see as we go along this particular book. So often it begins with something everybody can recognize, the sense that there is some sort of right and wrong out there, that there is things we ought to do and things we ought not to do. And that can change in emphasis. It can change as you kind of go down to the level, but there's still this feeling that there is these ideas of right and wrong. And that's where he wants to start the best explanations that he feels from either from scripture or church history, all this other stuff. That's kind of what we're going to dive into. But he doesn't really get, again, into systematic theology. He gets into these shared common experiences, and moral intuition is what he's trying to draw on as we get started. And what makes his argument, I think, so attractive to both skeptics and seekers is he's intentionally aiming at essentials. The moral law, the reality of God, the person and work of Jesus, the transformative call to live like Christians, He doesn't aim to settle denominational disputes. In fact, you'll even see he explicitly kind of puts them aside for the purpose of these talks and for the purpose of this book. But he really just tries to show that Christianity is plausible and reasonable. That's where he's going to start. So to approach the book as like this extended description of what Christianity shapes, I think is better as a starting point than necessarily like a crazy deep, comprehensive, systematic theology. Now, another feature from C.S. Lewis is this use of metaphor and analogy. We kind of talked about that a little bit. And it's amazing that still here in the middle of the century that these expressions still work. They still don't necessarily need all the context. Now, having the additional context always helps. But that's the thing about parables, analogies, metaphors. They're trying to help us see things from a little different angle, get a better view of what things are, engage different ways that people understand and memorize things. That whether they're more visual learners or all that kind of stuff. That's why analogy, I think, helps, and why he does such a good job of when he gets a little too deep, maybe at times, to kind of pull it back and give us an analogy and then jump back in. So it has a very conversational feel about it, which I think is also really, really cool. It just helps to make simple everyday images tied into these deeper theological points. So I think it makes it really, really cool. So now let's talk about this week's reading. We're going to start with the preface. We're going to start with the preface, which lays down what the book is about. So if you go to the study guide, the question that we have here, the first question is, how does Lewis define mere Christianity in the preface? What does he intend to include and exclude? If anybody's in the comments, you can answer that question if you have the study guide. If you don't, you can go to BibleNerd.com and you can print it off. It's just a free PDF that's right there on the top. But if you have access to it, that's the question for this week. And then down on the blog, and I'll switch it out for the top, so it'll be a little easier to find. But down the blog should be next week. So if you want to go and grab that for next week and fill it out this week and be ready for next week, that would be great. But anybody have a chance to get the study guide and answer question number one? How does Lewis define mere Christianity in the preface? What does he intend to include or exclude? Let me see if anybody's on comments here. All right. And again, I've got TikTok kind of here, Facebook and YouTube here. I'm going to try to work on getting them combined, but this is what we're dealing with just technology. I'm using StreamYard, if anybody knows StreamYard stuff. But I think I need more viewers on TikTok to allow like the studio. So might just be stuck with two cameras for a little while to get this going. But here we are, learning something new every day. All right, let's see if anybody's answering it. All right. All right, give it a second here. Just making sure I'm seeing comments. I hope comments are working. Otherwise, well, I guess I'll just be talking a whole bunch. But that's fine. That's fine. Still learning how all this stuff works. So the purpose of mere is intended to present the core common beliefs that unify Christians, not to settle doctrinal disputes or traditional excuses or schisms that have fractured different denominations. All that kind of stuff is not what he's really trying to deal with here. He's trying to deal with the common beliefs that unify Christians, that the majority, a mass majority of the Christians would say, yep, that's a Christian belief. And that's really what he wants to focus on here. And he says those core beliefs are what we believe about Jesus and God, the moral law, human sin, that Jesus was a person, that actually was a historical person that lived, died, and was resurrected. That's obviously a very core part of being a Christian. Then the Christian virtues about repentance and practical Christian living is really what he's going to try to do here. Now, what he excludes, so that's the question there, again, is denominational distinctiveness or doctrinal controversies or any kind of deep schisms between the different denominations of Christianity. And again, he's not looking at doing a systematic theology. Lewis really is seeking for a fair, unifying, rather than a divisive kind of conversation about some of these things. He will share essentials that make Christianity plausible and practical, and most importantly, transformational. That's really what he's going to be talking about. And again, not to resolve any kind of deep-seated theological, doctrinal differences that I see so often here on Facebook, and TikTok, which is really good to talk about. It's definitely worth talking about. But that's why I like to start with this study here with some of my social media platforms, that I just love this particular work. It always gets me based back to kind of some of those things when we get too off in the weeds on any kind of parts of Scripture. And one of the mentors I have, Tara Lee Cobble, talks about this like crazy, how she'll say, scream where Scripture screams, whisper where it whispers. And there's a fine line of where it becomes one of those two things, where we need to scream more often when we don't, and then when we're just screaming where Scripture is whispering on things. So this is definitely one of the areas where Scripture is screaming about what Christianity is. That's what mere Christianity is all about. So it is something where that's really what the reason is. That's what you'll see in the preface. So let's go to question number 2. This, again, is on the study guide on BibleNerd.com. So you can grab it and go through it this week and then be ready for next week's if you want to join us next week as well. How does Lewis use the example of a gentleman to explain what he means by Christian? I think that's a really cool question, the way that's framed, because you see this idea that even the word gentleman has changed. And that's what he's trying to draw on, as Lewis compares Christian to gentleman to show that the names of an inner moral quality is what that word now means and is trying to exude. It's trying to emphasize, when you say you're a gentleman, what does that mean? Well, originally it just meant that you own land. That's it. You had a coat of arms. You own land. That made you a gentleman. It had nothing to do with any kind of virtue across cultures. It didn't have anything to do with that's a more upstanding person or a more chivalrous or any of the other words attached with the modern idea of a gentleman. It's changed kind of how that's been emphasized, where originally it really was just designed to be that you own land. That's what a gentleman originally was. We can even see that with religious terms like apostle. It was those that were sent out. Well, now obviously that word is now very much a category of certain people. That word is in most Christian circles is elevated to the apostles, not to just anyone sent out like a missionary or anybody that's sent out as an ambassador for their denomination. It's kind of changed the meaning of that. And that's what he's kind of drawing on, is the idea of when you hear Christian, it imbues certain Christian virtues. You should act and walk a certain way. You should be different based on that. That if you're one way on Sunday and something else on Monday, that's where maybe you're not as mature in the Christian faith as needed. Maybe a little more time and developing has to be in there. That's where you even see Paul says that, new converts shouldn't be maybe overseers or deacons or bishops or a bunch of different terms we use in the language, because there does take a little maturity for the doctrine to work its way into the heart that then flows into everything that you do. And that's really where the Christian worldview is such a beautiful part of what he's going to talk about in this particular book. And I think the analogy also shows the ideal description of a thing, even if we always fall short of that ideal, which we always will. But it's the pursuit of that perfection. It's that pursuit, not the instant perfection, that is the Christian walk. And we'll fall down so many times, but it's the getting back up and learning from those mistakes, repenting from them, and just our work start to change from the have to do to the get to do. And that's where this movement and this ideal of what he's trying to do in mere Christianity, I think, really talks about. So let's get into book 1, the right and wrong as a clue to the meaning of the universe. And chapter 1 is entitled The Law of Human Nature. We're going to do some reading from the book itself. And because we don't have like chapter and verse, it's a little tricky to tell you where to go to it. That's one of the benefits of having the Bible, is I can sit there and go to every sentence and, within a sentence of anything in the Bible with the chapter and verse. Well, we don't get that with mere Christianity, unfortunately, but I will be doing some readings from it so you can follow along. And again, I was going to try to do like page count, but some of the books have different page count too, because the fonts and how they've put the work together can be a little bit different there. So it's a little tricky, but I still think it's important to read as much of the book as we can as we go through this, because I think, again, it's in his own words. So the more we can go directly to the source, directly to the Bible, directly to the book, I think is really, really helpful. So let's do our first reading today. Let's open up the C.S. Lewis. I got it sitting here. And here's our first kind of going into question number 3 on the handout. Again, the right and wrong is a clue to the meaning of the universe. So let's read this section in C.S. Lewis. Everyone has heard people quarreling. Sometimes it sounds funny, and sometimes it sounds merely unpleasant. But however it sounds, I believe we can learn something very important from listening to the kinds of things they say. They say things like, "You wouldn't like it if someone did the same to you. That's my seat. I was there first. Leave him alone. He wasn't doing you any harm. Why did you just shove in first? Give me a bit of your orange, and I'll give you a bit of mine. Come on, you promised." All these phrases that we hear. And I think it's kind of interesting because people are drawing on something that's outside of the two people in the conversation. They're drawing on something else that should govern the way we interact. And it's not just law, it's not just governments, it's not just that, it's something different. So I'll continue reading. People say things like that every day, educated people as well as uneducated, the children as well as the grown-ups. Now, what interests me about all these remarks is the man who makes them is not merely saying that the other man's behavior does not happen to please him. He is appealing to some sort of standard of behavior which he expects the other man to know about. And the other man very seldom replies, "To hell with your standard." Nearly always he tries to make out that what he has been doing does not really go against the standard, or that if he does, he has some sort of special excuse. He pretends there is some special reason in this particular case why the person who took the seat first should not keep it, or that things were quite different when he was given a bit of orange, or that sometimes, or that something has turned up which lets him off keeping his promise. It looks, in fact, very much as if both parties had in mind some sort of law or rule or fair play or decent behavior or morality, whatever you want to call it, about which they both really agree. And they have. If they had not, they might as well fight like animals. But they could not quarrel in the human sense of the word. Quarreling means trying to show that the other man is in the wrong. And there would be no sense in trying to do that unless you and he had some sort of agreement as to what right and wrong are. Just as there would be no sense in saying that a footballer had committed a foul unless there was some agreement about the rules of football. So I think that kind of lays the foundation of what he's going to do here. And you can see as he gets a little bit into kind of breaking this down, he always likes to throw in a little analogy, kind of break it off a little bit and give you a little different take on things. And I love that idea, that the idea of the footballers can get along because they know that there is a rule. And sometimes there's a rule keeper to make sure the rules are enforced. But generally speaking, there's definitely rules that are just always there, regardless if the referee is there. That's why kids can go out and play basketball and soccer and other things and have this general idea, okay, these are the rule. You can't do these things. And if you do, it's a foul or a violation or something. And there's a penalty of either timeouts or benched players or free throws or all the different things that we try to do. And so he's saying there's something like that when it comes to the idea of a moral law. There's an idea of some sort of standard we're both trying to appeal to. We see someone not appeal to it in the same or fullest way, we call them out on it. And then they usually come up with excuses of why it doesn't necessarily apply in the same way. But both are trying to appeal to that standard. Well, where did that come from? Who did that come from? It can't be an impersonable feeling. It can't be like math. It doesn't care if you get it right or wrong. You either get your math right or you get it wrong. It doesn't have a preference. I hope you get it right or hope you don't get it wrong. That doesn't have that. To have some sort of preference of things that are right and wrong, there has to be a person, a mind, an intelligence behind that thing that knows that it has preferences and knows what's better and worse in the whole scheme of this thing. Like the moral law in so many cases is designed to protect everything that it's trying to protect. And the breakdown of that is where we cause most of the problems in the world. And so that's, I think, really kind of cool how he's just using very simple, common issues like, hey, I was there first. You can't just take my seat, or reserving your seat. Or if you're standing in line somewhere and somebody butts in, boy, everybody in that line, front and back, usually will make a comment. Now, obviously it affects the people behind more so than maybe the ones in front, but there's still this idea, well, you shouldn't butt in line. It's not your turn. Everybody's been standing in line. You can't just butt in line. Where did that come from? Why? That's not a law. It came from the idea that's just something you shouldn't do, whether it's this culture or any culture. And we're going to see some wonderful analogies. I don't want to get too far ahead, but there's some wonderful analogies that he breaks down that are truly timeless, uncultural, unevolutionary stuff, any other pressures on these things. It truly is something that was outside of all those. Something else created it. And that's what we're going to kind of continue to dig through in this first book of C.S. Lewis. All right, let's go to question number 3. This is on the PDF that's on my website. So you can go to BibleNerd.com. You can go to the first link at the top. It's totally free. There's no sign in. credit card, none of that stuff. It's totally free. It's just a link to a PDF. And then in the blogs is next week. So I'll switch them after we're done tonight. So you can go back and grab it a little bit easier. But then you just have the whole week to kind of go through these questions. And then next week we'll answer them together. And if you want to join in on the live or make a comment or answer the question, I'd love to interact with everybody on here. That's kind of the whole reason for it. But let's go to question 3 in the handout. It reads, describe a recent disagreement you've seen where people appealed to a standard shared rather than just preferences. Let me read that again. Describe a recent disagreement you've seen where people appealed to a shared standard rather than just preferences. So what do you guys think? Did you have a chance to look that over or grab the study guide? I know not everybody did, but that's okay. So I'm going to think about that for a second too, because I wrote this a while back. This was part of like a 10-week study that I finished maybe 4 or 5 weeks ago. So it's kind of cool to go back to week 1 again and just kind of go through it again. But again, I already created all the content, so why not just get it out there? I mean, here it is, the whole thing. The whole 10 weeks is right here. So why not just get it out there and see what happens? Let's see. Describe a recent disagreement you've seen. Oh, you know what? Yeah. So I was at an expo, and this guy had set up outside in the yard, outside of the expo. So there was like rented space inside the expo and rented space outside of it. And he had his tent set up. So he had his little canopy. He had his canopy ready to go. And he was sitting there ready to go for him to show up. Well, another vendor showed up and moved it to a totally different spot. And both of them started having this discussion, like, why did you move my tent and my canopy? That's my space I rented. I was designated for there. And he was saying, no, you weren't designated for here. There's only 2 spots. And I had the 2 spots. So he was appealing to the fact that he thought he was right to be able to move somebody's stuff. But he's appealing to the fact that you just literally unstaked my stuff, touched my stuff without asking, not even checking with me, and moved it. And so it was really interesting to see they both were kind of appealing to some other authority, whether it was the exhibit hall or just the idea you don't touch somebody else's stuff. You don't move it, especially when it's set up, staked to the ground, and it was kind of interesting how watching this from a couple booths over, that how he was kind of having to move his stuff back and get other involved. And I mean, it was kind of an interesting thing. It was pretty contentious for a moment. I mean, it got pretty contentious, but it settled down pretty quickly, realizing, okay, it's just a canopy. We'll just put it back. It's totally fine. But it was a moment where you both could see they were arguing to some other standard that they both thought the other person should recognize. Basically, don't move somebody else's stuff. Don't steal somebody else's chair. If somebody reserves their spot with some sort of something and you just move it out of the way so you can take that spot, most people would say, well, you shouldn't do that. But why? Is it against the law? Are you going to get arrested? No, it's not. It's nothing like that. It's an ethical standard that you're appealing to. It's a morality outside of yourself that you're trying to appeal to, that you think that both people should know, but it's not written anywhere. It's conscience. It's what you should or shouldn't do, ought do or ought not do is a very common phrase you'll hear here in Christianity, is you should know better, And it's really kind of interesting how that is an appeal to a standard outside that everybody should adhere to. And that's kind of what this question is kind of drawing out. If you go to BibleNerd.com, and Bible Nerd is spelled with an E for the nerd in 3, or for the E in nerd. So that is just kind of a switching the 3, the E around to a 3. It was available. I thought it was cool. I love the idea of third for a lot of reasons. There's Easter eggs built into that name. That's kind of fun. The number 3. I mean, there's just some cool stuff there. But if you go to BibleNerd.com, right at the top, there'll be this study that you can go through and answer the questions, read it'll kind of give you an outline of what to read each week. And then week 2, what we'll do next week, will be down at the bottom in the blog. And so you can just download that and then I'll just move it up to the top. So just that way I kind of keep moving each week to the top. But anyway, so that's kind of what we're going through now. Let's see. So Lewis will break down this law and moral right and wrong, and he will call it the law of human nature. So that's the term that he kind of uses in the 1940s, is a little different than what maybe we'd use the law of human nature now. Just that context may have changed. That's kind of the term that he uses throughout the book, is the law of human nature. And he contrasts that law that governs bodies like organisms, like gravity or chemistry or biology, which humans cannot disobey, with this distinct moral law that governs human choices, and we can choose to follow or break. And he argues that unlike the physical, biological facts and the law of human nature is actually something where humans ought to behave in that way. It's the standard to say, okay, you should do these things and not do something else. And he will use ought and ought not a lot through the book. And I think that makes it just kind of fun to kind of use that terminology. And he claims that this moral sense is broadly universal. It's accepted across humanity. It appears obvious. It's recognizable. He uses the example of war and the Nazis. Calling the enemy wrong only makes sense that, like us, they have some sort of understanding of a moral or a universal right and wrong. If the Nazis generally lacked any notion of moral standards, we could not blame them any more than we could blame somebody for having a different hair color, is what he'll say in the book. Thus, Lewis insists that moral condemnation presupposes a shared moral standard, one that people can know, recognize, and more importantly, choose to follow or violate or justify why they're not following some sort of shared moral standing. And that's often what you see is when people appeal to that, they usually don't necessarily outright just say your moral standard's wrong. They try to then justify, okay, why am I breaking that moral? What's the reason? What's the excuse, legitimate or not? Whatever it is usually how they try to rectify that. And now we have Lewis encountering a common objective. The moral laws or morality itself is subjective. He'll get into that conversation, I think, in a really, really cool way. And he'll use the idea that cultures and societies are the things that create this. So it is subjective to the individual person or the society or the day and age or the time or whatever it is. Yet we can see ethics and morals have been true throughout history. So let's read some of the examples that he uses to help break down this subjective, objective morality clause and how he uses some analogies in there that's really cool. So let's go to the reading in the book. This will be before we go to question 4. So here we go. Think of a country where people were admired for running away in battle, or where a man felt proud for double-crossing all the people who were kindest to him. You might just as well have imagined a country where 2 and 2 make 5. Men have differed as regards to what people ought to be unselfish. Sorry, let me read that. Men have differed as regards what people you ought to be selfish to or unselfish to, whether it be your own family or fellow countrymen or everybody. But they've always agreed that you ought not put yourself first and above absolutely everything. Selfishness has never been admired. Men have differed as to whether they should have 1 wife or 4, but they've always agreed that you simply must not have any woman that you liked. So he's appealing to kind of these two things that are very universal. Selfishness in battle or selfishness in your exchange with somebody that's been kind to you, or even the idea of marital issues, like you shouldn't have marital relations with certain ages or certain numbers or certain that's already married. I mean, there's all these kind of, now they can differ in number, they can differ in practicality, but when you strip all that away, there's still going to be something that says, okay, now you can't do that because we've hit kind of that base moral law that is timeless. And what I think he really alludes to here, I think is one of the great ones. You simply can't just have any woman that you like, regardless of age, regardless if they're married, regardless of disability, regardless of whatever other category you are. There is at least a sense throughout any kind of other differentiation of how many you can marry or any of that type of stuff. There still is these agreed upon standards when it comes to that issue. And same with the selfishness. It's just never admired. Imagine a country that ran around admiring people that were just outrageously selfish. It just wouldn't happen. Whether it's now, the Roman Empire, the Babylonian Empire, I mean, go all the empires, it never would have been something. So it wasn't from those cultures that created that standard. It's something outside of us that's pressing on us. And that's what the moral law and what the argument he's going to make for it. Let's go back to the reading here. Let me just get my notes ready. Okay. So next, Lewis talks about the very person who says that there isn't a real right and wrong is the very one who will appeal to an outside standard the moment a promise is broken. Lewis then goes on to the highest forms of promise by comparing countries' treaties. And this is really relevant because he's in World War II and the idea of trying to have these different countries that are getting attacked and surrendering and all these treaties and things that are being made up. So he kind of shows that as the highest form of a promise. When entire countries are signing these treaties to say, okay, this is ending, whatever agreements are within those treaties. When we compare ancient and modern moral codes, we find broad agreement that selfishness is never admired, that sexual behavior is regulated, that trustworthiness is required. But even Lewis says that none of us seems to keep the law completely. This year, this month, and even probably today, we're going to fail to practice the very kind of behavior we expect from other people. And when we're found out, we often will get offended or defensive. Our natural tendency is to maybe make up an excuse of why we have fallen short, why we have missed the mark in that sense. And that's usually what we first draw upon. So let's go to reading number 3. All right, let me pull it up real quick. Excuse me. There may be all sorts of excuses for us. That time that we were unfair to the children was when we were very tired. That slightly shady business about the money, the one you almost forgot, came up when you were very hard up. And what was promised to do for old so-and-so and was never done well, you never would have promised it had you known how frightfully busy you were going to be. What a great excuse that is. When you make a promise, then realize, well, I didn't realize making the promise that it was going to be hard to keep, that I'd get really busy, or that something else would pop up. And, I promised in kind of a dire strait. Now I'm out of it. So that promise, it was under wrong pretenses. I mean, holy cow, how often does that happen? How often is that the excuse we use when the promise is something at a different stage of life? And I think it's really interesting how that's just a kind of a human nature thing that we're pushing against, knowing that we're falling short of the standard we would put on ourselves, that was put on to us by the holy creator of the moral law. Don't want to get too far ahead of myself, but I think that's just such a great analogy that he uses here. And then to finish the reading, and as for our behavior to our wife or husband or sister or brother, if I only knew how irritating they would be, I would not wonder at all. And who the dickens am I anyway? Just a great little section here that we have in C.S. Lewis. And again, I think it's just so wonderful how he uses some of these phrases. So let's go to question number 4 in the handout. Again, you go to BibleNerd.com. Nerd is with the 3, and you can download what we're reading through. And then next week's will be available there, and it's in the blog down below. But this gives you an opportunity to kind of go through what I'm going through here with this study. And we'll be the next 10 weeks, every Tuesday at 7 o'clock, we'll be going through this. And I've got kind of TikTok over here on this camera. Hello, TikTok. And then I got Facebook and YouTube over here. I'm going to try to get them combined. I just need more followers, I guess, to get the studio stuff on TikTok. So I have to kind of keep an eye on both screens to make sure not people are commenting. But anyway, all right, let's go to question number 4 in the handout. Where'd my mouse go? Here we go. Okay, here we go. Why do we get defensive or anxious when called out for not keeping our end of the deal? Describe a time where you felt that way and what you did. What was the go-to excuse you have used in the past? So I think it's kind of a lot of these are application questions as well. And so it was kind of fun to do this in a live men's Bible study group. So some of that's kind of what I was hoping for this vibe, is to be able to have people interact as we go through these questions. But if you don't have them, you're going to miss them. But you can put it in the comments or jump on live on the panels, and we can kind of talk about some of these questions. They'll be kind of fun. Let me read it again. Why do you get defensive or anxious when called out for not keeping, quote, your end of the deal? Describe a time you felt that way and what you did. What is a go-to excuse you use? So this is a chance to kind of think about that a little bit. I know I sure do, because when I know I've fallen short or something gets called out, it's kind of the natural first tendency. And the more I mature in Christianity, the more I realize I'm fallen and I need a savior, and I have taken a lot more accountability for those mistakes and just try to own up to it and just come clean more often. And confessing sins is definitely a muscle you have to work on. And this just is one of those questions I was trying to draw out with the class. It's just an opportunity to kind of pull back that curtain a little bit and kind of put some light on some of those things, because it is kind of our natural tendency, I think, is to be defensive or anxious or make excuses of why all of a sudden someone's calling us out on something that is a moral standard or some sort of promise that was broken, or something that some of these analogies that we're using. So if you're in the comments, you can kind of put an example and we can read it. And again, you can go to BibleNerd.com and get the PDF. And then next week will be available on the top, and next week's is already available down in the blog. So if you go to the blog, you can pull out number 2, and then we'll be discussing that next week. So love your involvement next week. Put it on your calendar. Every Tuesday, 7 p.m. Mountain Standard Time is when I'll be going live on these platforms. So love to have you join in on that as well. So why do we get defensive or anxious when called out for not keeping our end of the deal? What do you think? Any thoughts, comments? Checking all my screens here. All right. Want to make sure comments are working too. All right, let's keep going through the study. Lewis rounds out his first talk with two big points. First, all human beings all over the earth throughout time have this curious idea that we ought to behave in certain ways, and we can't seem to get rid of it. And second, we don't actually behave in that way. So we don't hold ourselves sometimes to the standards we think everybody else should. And when anybody else is either called out one way or the other, excuses of why they're falling short is much more common than copting to it or coming clean or anything is like the first reaction. Now, the more mature we are in Christianity, the more that we're serving Christ, I think the quicker we can kind of come clean with those types of things. But it is something where it is a muscle that has to be worked on. It's something you have to practice and get better at. And I'm working on it all the time. And I'm still trying to recognize when I'm pulling up these excuses instead of just owning up to the times that I made a promise that I knew I wasn't going to keep, or that the promise changed because now I don't think I need to do it as bad, or whatever it might be. I mean, we all have these experiences. And I really think what's trying to be drawn out here is there's something, an intelligence, a personal God, a mind, whatever term you want to use at this stage, that is pushing those moral laws on us because it's outside of society. It's outside of race and ethnicity and gender. It's outside of all those categories that we put these things into, that it seems to be something we're all trying to appeal to, that is a God that has preferences. The God moral, the creator of the moral law has things that he prefers and doesn't prefer. And yet he still lets those things happen. So I guess he thinks and knows that allowing that thing to exist is better than not having exist for some reason maybe we're just not fully aware of. And we'll get into that even further. I don't want to get too far ahead because we're trying to lay the foundation of a moral lawgiver, a theistic argument, before we even get to the God of any religion, especially Christianity. That's really what this first book in Mere Christianity is going to do, is it's going to just break down a practical reason to believe in a moral law that's objective, that is set or created by an intelligence, a mind, something outside that does have preferences. Like I used the analogy early on, math is like this abstract, impersonable thing. It doesn't care if you get it right or wrong. You either get it right or wrong. That's it. I even think it's kind of funny when people associate this with like the word karma. Karma would still have to have a preference of what's good or bad. And it would change based on the situation a lot, but it still would have to have a preference. So it still have to have some sort of mind behind it that can say, oh, yes, that's good. No, that's bad. It still has to have preferences. That's how it's built in. If it's completely impersonable, it wouldn't care. It wouldn't have any reason to care if you got it right or wrong. It just wouldn't. That's why a theistic worldview and the Christian, and when we step even closer to Christianity, explains some of this stuff and gives us a practical and a realistic and reasonable reason to believe it. Now, are you there yet? Maybe not. That's fine. But that's kind of what this work is going to help us do, is have some of this verbiage to be able to kind of wrestle with some of these concepts. So let's go to question number 5. Let me pull it up here. I got too many monitors. Holy moly. My mouse is all over the place. All right, let's do question number 5. How do these two facts, Lewis asserts, we know the law, we fail to keep it, set up his next move towards arguing for a moral source or a lawgiver? So I think that's pretty interesting. What do you guys think? This is question number 5. How do these two facts, Lewis asserts, we know the moral law, we fail to keep it, set up the next move towards arguing for a moral source or a lawgiver? What do you guys think? This is chapter 1 of book 1, the law of human nature. That's what all these questions are based on. Let's see if I got comments. Make sure I've got all my monitors got something on them. Thanks for joining. Thanks for tuning in if you're watching. This is the week 1 of Mere Christianity. We're going 10 weeks through this wonderful book, and there's a handout each week available on my website that you can download and go through these questions and go through the readings. It's a 10-week thing, so it's hopefully not too cumbersome to go through it through the week, but we'll just kind of keep building on these concepts each week, so it'll be really fun. All right, let's go to chapter 2, which is some objections. And what this is kind of cool. This is one of those moments where the book was a bunch of talks given to the BBC, and then obviously C.S. Lewis got some letters that were pushing back on some of these concepts. So it gave him a chance to kind of address that. It wasn't a live speech to the BBC or a live radio address, but was a chance to kind of add that to the book of just maybe some common objections or some other things he wanted to clarify and add to the book that wouldn't be able to be added to the live broadcast. This is one of those examples where he was able to kind of say, okay, I'm getting a common question or common objection. Now I'm just going to go ahead and push back on that objection a little bit. And that's what chapter 2 is all about in Mere Christianity. And again, if you're just joining us, the book is set up in parts or sections that are also called books. So it's a little confusing, but there's 4 books within the book or 4 sections. We're now in book 1, chapter 2. So that's if you're following along or you're involved with it, that's where we're at there. So this is kind of cool because, again, we get to see behind the curtain a little bit of where he got some letters, some common objections, and he said, okay, wait a minute, I want to deal with these. And he felt the desire that it was worth at least adding to the book on some of the things that he was getting arguments for. And it seems people were writing back about instinct. They were writing back about promptings or urges like motherly love or sexual desire or even the desire for like food, those impulses. And he's saying that the letters that were coming off is saying that's what's driving the moral law is instinct or some form of that. And he kind of puts those into the same category because when you kind of strip away motherly love, sexual desire, food, some of these, it's kind of falls to an animalistic type instinct. And we have felt that desire to help other people. And so he calls that the herd instinct, this idea that we naturally want to help people because of herd instinct. But as Lewis would say, feeling a desire to help is quite different from feeling that you ought to help, whether you did or not. That's the difference between a instinct or an impulse or that kind of thing pushing on us versus that we should have or shouldn't have done it. That's completely different. And what makes that so different is we don't get to see it by studying it. Like if there's a lion that just attacks something, there's no way of knowing if he felt like he should have or shouldn't have. We just see what he did. And that's kind of what instinct is a little bit more. It's more reactionary in different ways than the feeling that you ought to have done something different, whether you wanted to or not. So let's read number 4 in the study guide that actually is part of the C.S. Lewis and how he kind of addresses this. So let's get it right from the horse's mouth, so to speak. So let me get to that screen. Okay, here we go. Supposing you heard a cry for help from a man in danger, you'd probably feel 2 desires. 1, a desire to give him help due to your herd instinct. The other desire is to keep out of danger due to instinct of self-preservation. So we have 2 different instincts here. Herd instinct to help that person. Self-preservation would be the other instinct. Which one's right or wrong? They don't have that qualifier. It's not an ethical question. It's not a moral question. If you're just relying on instinct to drive why you do something. And that's why it's different than ethics or moral law. And that's the argument he's trying to make here. Let's keep reading. But you will find in yourself, in addition to these 2 impulses, a third, which tells you that you ought to follow the impulse to help and suppress the impulse to run away. Interesting. So even the moral law is the human nature, that the law of human nature is how he phrases it, is pushing on us even more so than maybe the instincts are, which is really an interesting thing to say, okay, that's still a step further back than any other explanation that we can put in front. Still, when you get further and further back, it hits that wall of a moral, human nature, ethical law. Let's keep reading. Now, this thing that judges between those 2 instincts, that decides which should be encouraged, cannot itself be either of them. So, what a great, I'm going to read that again. Now, this thing that judges between the 2 instincts, that decides which should be encouraged, cannot itself be either one of them. So it can't be either instinct is the one that's trying to encourage, or discourage the activity. It can't be those things itself. It has to still be something that's outside of those 2 instincts because it can't go against itself in the sense. So we have 2 different instincts here. The herd instinct to protect that person, the self-preservation instinct over here. Neither one of them would give up to the other without something outside of both of them that is pushing the ought to or ought not to do. That's what he's trying to say. That's why he uses instinct or evolution or these other forces would still have to have something behind it even deeper, even further, that is encouraging and pushing the things away because they can't unto themselves do the same thing. That's what morals and ethical things are different. They're different. And that's what he's trying to push back here. Oh, we got something going on TikTok. I got to match up this whole thing here. Maybe it's all right. Uh-oh. Try it again. Hold on. I'm still learning all this. I got to put this little. Cool. Okay. I guess the live is going to go anyway. All right. I'm still learning TikTok. Still learning all this stuff. I love talking about this stuff. That's why I want to do it more often. And this just gives me a way to be able to talk about this stuff. And again, I already prepared the whole thing. I mean, the thing's sitting here. I mean, here we go. It's already there. Why not just put it out there? For better or for worse. Let's see what happens. Let's just put it out there for the whole time. What's the absolute worst that can happen? All right. Let's read that again. Now this thing, the instincts, the herd instinct, the self-preservation instinct, the instinct itself that judges the moral law, this thing that is suppressing those two instincts in themselves cannot be themselves. You might as well say that the sheet of music, which tells you at a given moment to play one note on the piano and not another, is itself one of the notes on the keyboard. Another great analogy. That's what makes C.S. Lewis so fun to read, is it just takes these concepts and tries to give us an analogy that can help shrink it a little bit, just get our heads wrapped around it. I love that. You might as well say that the sheet of music, which tells you at a given moment to play one note on the piano and not the other, is the notes on the keyboard themselves. It can't be. That's what he's trying to make the argument for. The moral law tells us the tune we have to play. Our instincts are merely the keys. That's what he's making that argument. And this is some objections that came in. That's what this chapter is about, is somebody pushing back on some of the arguments C.S. Lewis was making. So I think that's really important to read that section because it's just done so incredibly well. So let's go back to my notes here. And we'll pick up right where we're leaving off here. Okay. Lewis argues the moral law is not merely one of our instincts because it can demand we follow weaker impulses over stronger ones. It can promote us to strengthen or suppress instincts, and no single impulse is always good. Instead, the moral law functions like a conductor or a musical score that directs and balances our various instincts to produce the tune of right conduct. The thing that tells you which note on the piano needs to be played louder cannot itself be the note itself. The mind that created the very universe can't be a mind created in that universe. But much more about that later. We're going to get into that later. The mind that created the very universe cannot be the mind created in that universe. Ooh, there's a deep line for you. All right, let's go to question number 6. We're almost wrapping up here. Can you think of a time when the moral law asked you to favor a weaker impulse over a stronger one? What did you decide and what motivated you? Ooh, discussion questions are fun. Application discussion questions. So again, these were questions I prepared for like a live group. We had maybe 40, 45 people in the room as we're going through this study. And so I try to do a lot of it as kind of group participation. I'm hoping that's what will happen here as we go through this study, is that people want to get on and we'll discuss some of these questions. And to get the questions, again, I mentioned a couple times, you got to go to BibleNerd.com. It's right at the top. There's a link that just says Mere Christianity Study right at the top. That'll be for this week. Down in the blog is week 2, and then I'll put that up to week 1 just after we get done tonight, just so it's accessible through the whole week. So hopefully you'll have it ready and go through it this week and be ready for next week's conversation. And when you can join in and just have a lot of fun as we kind of review this incredible work by C.S. Lewis known as Mere Christianity. So I'd love to have you engage. And I've got Facebook kind of over here. I've got TikTok over here. So I've got a couple different cameras going, trying to figure out how that works. I'm still new to this stuff, but I'm trying to figure it out. But I use a system called StreamYard that has YouTube and Facebook really easy, but TikTok I think has to have more followers to access like the studio backend stuff. And I'm not quite there yet as much on TikTok. But anyway, so we're just learning as we go here. We're just stretching our muscles a little bit. Learning new tricks, as they say. So let me read that question one more time. Can you think of a time when the moral law asked you to favor a weaker impulse over a stronger one? How did you or what did you decide, and what motivated you? So we can do any comments in there. Anybody wants to comment, I can pull them up too. I need to learn how to do all that on all this stuff. So I haven't even seen anybody request. So hopefully I haven't done it wrong, but so, and I think that's what makes the moral law different than any kind of impulse we have or instinct that we have. Is oftentimes it will have you, again, and this analogy I think is great that C.S. Lewis uses. If you see somebody in danger, I've even seen these videos where somebody robs a gas station and a lot of people just freeze. Their self-preservation instinct takes over. And then you see other people that will act, and that's what, if both instincts were correct, no matter how anybody reacted, wouldn't be good or bad. It wouldn't have a difference. If that's the only thing that governed their decision is some sort of instinction, whether self-preservation or hunger or herd instinct or sexual desires or any kind of a reproductive, impulse, to reprocreate or whatever you want to call that sexual desire, there still is a moral law that is, again, a step back even further, that's guiding those instincts to be able to say when they're being abused, overused, misused, used in the wrong way. All of those things is still what the ethical idea is actually imposing even on instincts. And so it can't just be purely instincts on why we treat people one way or another, because it wouldn't be good or bad unto itself. The moral law is what we would have to appeal to, of why that reaction, that instinct, the thing you did was good or bad. And we're all appealing to a standard we think all of us should appeal to. And it's outside of just cultural. Now, is there cultural emphasis? Sure. But when you strip that down even layer deeper, you're always going to run into something that is universal around the entire planet, around time, cultures, that was relevant in BC and AD, would still have some of those things that are universal. So they cannot be inside a culture itself. It has to be something that's outside of it that pushes on us. And that's what theists believe is God, the holy creator of the moral law. And that's what he's trying to argue for before we get to the God of Christianity, of any religion. He's not within 100 miles yet of the God of Christianity in any of this conversation in the first part of this book. It's all laying the idea that there is a moral lawgiver, and that moral lawgiver is outside of society and culture and human it's outside of that. And it's personable. It cares whether you get it right or wrong. It has preferences. It's not abstract like a math equation that doesn't care if you get it right or wrong. It does not care. So that's what he's trying to appeal to as we go through this. All right, let's have any questions. Let me just check how many questions we got left. I think they're usually about 7 to 8 a week. Yep, we got about 8 a week. So we got one more question left in the study guide. If you go to BibleNerd.com, you can get a copy of the study guide and read through it. You can kind of catch up this week if you want. And then week 2 will be posted in the blog right now. I posted it this morning. So you can grab that, print it off, kind of review it this week and be ready for next Tuesday. And then I'll move that one up to the top. So I'll just kind of leave that first one up there for a little while so people can download week 1. And it doesn't cost anything. There's no sign in. It's simply a PDF link. Nothing tracking, nothing like that. There's nothing embedded in it. It's just simply a PDF document. I'm really trying to make it free and accessible, and that's kind of what I'm trying to do. So I'll leave week 1 up there for a little while. Week 2 is available, and then I'll just rotate that up so it's available at the top. But I'd love to have you print it off, fill it out, engage with the material, engage with the questions, and have them ready for next week. And we'll go through them. We'll pull you up live here if you'd like. You can join, comment, and we'll continue to go through this study guide together. But let's wrap up the study for tonight. Let's go to, let me get my screens right here. All right, here we go. So Lewis warns that evaluating every single impulse, even love and humility and some of these other terms, are absolutely guided by a moral law. That it's not merely a social convention by comparing these different things, that there still are further back one more step. He offers 2 arguments: cross-cultural moral singularities that suggest a common standard, and the very idea of moral progress or reform presupposes a real standard by which one is set that is truer or better than the other. So anything that's moral progress isn't coming up with some new thing. It's trying to get more moral. Any reform is trying to get better what is truer or better, or the ought to more often. That's what all moral progress or reformation is trying to do. And that's really what I think he's trying to draw on, is we're all trying to get closer to that standard we all fall short of. And whether that takes laws, cultural differences, that's what all these things are trying to do. So if all moral laws are merely just opinions, if all moral codes are just preferences, like better or anything else wouldn't have any meaning to it. So that's kind of what he's trying to say, is that almost everything that's progressing is trying to get closer to a moral law that's already there. It's a standard that's been there since the beginning of time that we're all trying to get closer to. It's not like we're perfecting morality. We're trying to get closer to the better version of it every single time. Every country, every society then puts that moral progression on the other societies that are falling behind, that are not following that same kind of progression. And they'll have their own standards too. The one that says, okay, we got this moral part a little bit better than this country, and this country says, no, but you guys do this. I mean, you can see how they're all trying to appeal to some sort of moral standard, even outside of their own existence. And that's got to be a moral lawgiver. There's got to be something we're trying to appeal to. And that's what the whole thing's about. Let's read number 7. Question 7 in the handout reads, has reading these open chapters of Mere Christianity changed or strengthened your view on the moral law? Do you find alternative explanations like cultural evolution, technology, human flourishing better account for perceived moral improvements? Well, that's a deep question. Who wrote that? Oh, has reading these opening chapters of Mere Christianity changed or strengthened your view on the moral law? Do you find alternative explanations better accounting for this? I mean, what do you guys think? I've run across people that say it's an evolutionary thing, or human flourishing is now just allowed for us to be more moral because we have maybe less food insecurity or access to better water, medical, life longevities, child rearing tech, all the other things. Is that really what's improving things, or is it a moral lawgiver? That's kind of the question behind that I was trying to draw out, because there's definitely people and there's good arguments for it. And maybe I don't think they're great arguments, but there's at least reasonable arguments. And I think that's what C.S. Lewis is trying to say here, is that Christianity is reasonable. It's plausible. There's good reasons behind what we believe and why. Now, if you get deep into the weeds of certain theological topics, that's where even within Christianity, there's going to be arguments. But I think that's what the idea here is the moral law a better explanation and a moral lawgiver than cultural evolution, technology, human flourishing, the other excuses that are trying to say, okay, that's what's actually getting us more moral? That'd be the question I would have going forward through the study. And just if you want to answer it in email or text me or interact with any of these questions during the week, I'd love to interact with you. That's kind of the hope for this whole thing, is just to put the content I created out there in just some new different ways and poke some holes in it and have some discussions. That's what makes this stuff really fun to talk about for me anyway. So maybe you relate to that, maybe not. But that wraps up our study. I want to try to keep it to about an hour, maybe an hour and a half, with any interactions that we're going to have. But I really appreciate anybody that jumped on for a few seconds. Like and subscribe to either my Facebook, YouTube, or TikTok for more conversations like this, for more opportunities to just talk about theology and Christianity. That's kind of what I'm trying to grow in my own study and my own learning, and the opportunity to be able to just share what I'm learning in different ways, I think just makes this a lot more fun. And again, I already created all the content for this, so why not just put it out there in new and exciting ways? So that was kind of the idea of this whole study. So this wraps up week 1. Love to have you be a part of week 2. Go to my website at BibleNerd.com. I will have in the blog, we'll have kind of a wrap up of this particular meeting, and then we'll have the study guide that you can print off or save or e-read or whatever. It's just a PDF in the blog, and then I'll put that up at the top. So if you still want week 1, I'll leave it up there for a little while just so you can grab week 1. But week 2 will move up to that spot probably tomorrow to just give everybody a chance to kind of switch over. But I'd love to have you print it out, fill it out, and discuss it with me next week. Jump on the live, activate in the comments, however you want to engage, and just kind of go through those answers and be a part of this whole thing. So until then, hope you have a wonderful night. May the Lord bless you and keep you, and we'll see you next week. All right. There's TikTok's off. Now I got to figure out how to turn this one off. I really will have to figure out how to get them on both, because it's going to be a little tricky trying to do comments on both. But I mean, I only have a certain number of views, I think, on TikTok. And so I have a little bit more on Facebook and YouTube so far. That's kind of where I started this whole thing. And so I just got to figure it out. But anyway, if you've been watching, I appreciate you. Maybe like and subscribe, and we'll see you next week.